Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's midday weather outlook for the southern region brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're going to start in the tropics today because of a couple of new reports that were released at the end of this week that we need to be discussing. So first, from the National Hurricane Center, here is the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook. And so we have a wave that we're watching right here that has moved off of Africa, and there's more behind it moving across Africa. Now at this point, just seeing how disorganized this is, the Storm Prediction Center, the National Hurricane Center is giving this a 10% probability of continuing to form into a tropical system. And we can see that that's echoed pretty well here in the 2 to 5 day outlook from the ECMWF, watching the same area, giving it something between a 10 and up to a 40% chance of developing into a wave. But as you can see behind it, the European model is clearly seeing more waves rolling off of Africa. And the conditions across Africa are actually quite conducive to continue to produce this. So here's the first of those two reports. Yesterday, the National Hurricane Center increased its probability of having an above normal hurricane season now to 85%. And of course, this does already include the systems we've had up to this point, and we are clear to the letter I. So we've had 9 named systems so far this year. So as you can see, they're expecting something between 19 and 25 named systems and potentially upwards of 11 hurricanes, 3 to 6 of which make major status, which would be Category 3 or stronger. So very low probability that we would call this a season normal or even below normal. Now, some of the pieces that are coming together here for this include the La Nina that is forecast, which we talked about in earlier videos this week, and the lower wind shear values, plus the very warm ocean temperatures. Another report, this is the second one here, was just released on the 5th by Colorado State University. So they've been doing this for, I don't know how many years, maybe 25 years, been releasing these long-range hurricane outlooks, and they're very good. And they see a very similar thing. You can see that they're actually forecasting a doubling of named systems. Normal is 12, they're going for 24. In fact, most of the statistics here are about double what you would call a normal season. So they're predicting, this particular season to have, take a look down here, 200 units of accumulated cyclone energy, where 106 are normal. So it's as though we're about ready to enter the most busy time of the year with respect to tropical cyclones, and all indications are that it's going to be busier than normal. So to put the pieces together, this was a story we've been watching much of this week. We see the MJO, which came out of phase 1 and 2, where it spent most of June and July, came quickly here at the beginning of August, but then his forecast cut right back over to phase 8 and 1. And why that's important is because where that allows the upper levels of the atmosphere to have good support for rising motion, which is going to be here from Africa over to the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and Western Atlantic. So we continue to see more suppressing motion here across the Pacific in the upper levels, and that would be the result of the MJO retreating back over to the Western Hemisphere and into Africa. So we're going to watch this all very, very carefully progressing forward, because this seems to be timed well with the busiest time of the year. So it's an important update here, so keep a close eye on the tropics in the coming days. The longer term outlook, we talked about the La Nina yesterday, but I want to make sure I hit this again. One of the things that we think is going to be critical for the steering currents for these hurricanes is that over the next month, so this is August 6th through September 5th, the models are really keeping the bulk of the higher atmospheric pressure sitting in this part of the Atlantic. Now, we watch this high pressure cell move. Sometimes it moves over in this direction, sometimes it retreats back to the west. It can shift north and south, but if it does maintain this position here, this would mean that systems are likely going to have to curl around that. Now, they curl around that for 2 reasons. One, of course, the prevailing wind direction, and 2, something called the Coriolis force or Coriolis effect turns them to the north away from the equator. And this does not mean that we won't get anything out of the Gulf. No. The Gulf is very warm and potentially can produce large systems very quickly, but it's just looking at the broader steering current here across the open Atlantic Ocean. And you can then see the next 46 days how active the model is in producing tropical convection off of the west coast of Africa. So very clear signal here of systems developing in this area, which again we call the main development region. And you can see what they're doing in terms of the track here. You can see it just pulling it around that high. Now, don't look at this and go, well, it's not going to storm in through here. That's really not what we would use this for. We would use this primarily just to look at the overall activity and pattern coming off of the west coast of Africa. Okay, back to the U.S. What we're looking at next is the last 24 hours of total accumulated precipitation. We have seen a lot of scattered and very heavy rainfall from Florida through parts of Georgia, getting up into parts of the Carolinas, the mid-Atlantic. We were watching overnight last night storms moving out of Kansas through parts of parts of Oklahoma. In fact, we can see those early this morning here. This radar animation goes to about 7:30 in the morning Central Time. And so the storms are still pushing through parts of Oklahoma over toward Arkansas and eventually toward the Delta. As we look out through the next 7 days, though, we're going to continue to see chances of rainfall here in parts of the southeast, getting up to the Carolinas and mid-Atlantic. Very heavy rainfall potentially, also extending down into Florida. And there's going to be this like really pesky frontal boundary that's just going to sit there. Meanwhile, storm systems will be going through the Canadian prairies, and they're going to be bringing their fronts, but they're not going to make it down into our southern region. So with general higher atmospheric pressure over parts of Texas and the weakened monsoonal flow in the southwest, we generally see that the models are painting this area dry. We will still expect to see thunderstorm activity here, and it will get into central Texas, but be very spotty at best. In the middle there is sandwiched to the Delta. And at this point, while I do see chances of daily thunderstorms happening because nothing's cutting down the Gulf of Mexico moisture transport, it's not looking overly wet in this particular projection because of those daily thunderstorms not being well resolved in this model. So we look at the European to see those features as well. So you can see the stormier pattern that's going to be over here from Florida all the way up through the mid-Atlantic. What we get in between there in Texas is a lot of hit or miss storms because this frontal boundary just stays up here in the Corn Belt and doesn't sag down far enough south to give us a consistent wet pattern down here as we get into eastern Texas over toward like Atlanta. But on the northern edge of our southern region, parts of Tennessee, especially western Tennessee, getting northern Arkansas and southern Missouri, could potentially see some very wet conditions, especially as we move into next week. But notice the model overall showing drier conditions back farther to the west. Now we can look at this in two different ways. I'm going to give you the first way first, which is I'm just going to play it. Do you see the flashing of green that keeps happening over the southeast? Watch it again with me. Just see every day on the heat of the day, pop, pop, pop. That is the just normal convective activity that is not being shut down by any large high pressure systems. It's just the flow of moisture out of the Gulf. It's the flow of moisture off of the Atlantic. And what we continue just to get here is frontal boundaries that don't make it far enough to the south in this area to change that precipitation up. So if you watch again through the weekend, you see the main front. Well, it sits way up here into early next week. And so it's just day after day of storms popping on the heat. So these models are not going to well resolve who gets the heavier rainfall, but I think we in the south understand this type of pattern. Just notice the isobars. See how they cut from south to north like that? That's what tells you that there's no big dominant high pressure cell sitting here shutting it all down. But you notice as you get back over to Texas, well, the upper level patterns are playing a critical role in that. I'm going to talk to you about those. On the left, I've got the GFS by day 10, and on the right, I have the European. Now, you can see that they are in some agreement, but not much. Take a look at the GFS, much deeper trough out west, and a ridge that's kind of forecast to sit here in the upper levels. But I'm going to tell you, it's a relatively weak ridge. You notice that the height anomalies on that ridge, which is the color shading, is not much above average. So this isn't as though this is one of those large blocking features that shuts everything down. But overall, what this produces is going to be a pattern where we don't get a lot of fronts through there like we just discussed. And the European has a similar pattern, but just a broader ridge over this area. So it wants to keep the jet stream further to the north, and by keeping that jet stream, let's draw that again, up here to the north, it's just favoring, disorganized daily convective events. In other words, scattered thunderstorms. That seems to be the name of the game. So as we go out here into week 2, you can see that both models want this. See it? And that brings quite a bit of wet weather to parts of the Mid-South, Tennessee, Kentucky, getting over to the Carolinas. Both models picking up on that. But you look down here in the GFS and you see this all showing up dry, where it's a little bit wetter here in the European. I think the European's handling the moisture transport out of the tropics better. I think it's handling that daily convective weather better as well. But we do notice that the monsoonal precipitation is quieter than what it normally would be this time of year. And while we're not going to call that dry, because it will be storms, it's just drier than normal as you look out here into week 2, which gets us all the way out, to the 21st of August. Talking about temperatures, over the last week, this is how things have compared to normal. So a deep trough that sat in the midsection of the United States, keeping things quite cool. Over the southeast, we saw normal temperatures overall, despite Tropical Storm Isaias going through. But very warm in parts of Arizona, stretching clear up to British Columbia. Moving forward in this forecast, let's just take a look at those daily high temperatures and see what we've got here. As we play this forward, let's watch that one more time. There we go. We can see going from Friday into Saturday here, a lot of low to mid 90s in our southern region, getting back over to triple digits in Texas. Arizona still packing up those 110 plus degree days in this forecast. So this is Saturday's highs, and compared to normal, we get into Sunday, much of the same. Monday, much of the same. Tuesday, much of the same. See that? This is when that frontal boundary tries to get stalled out here to the north of our southern region, but you see that the south is just very consistent all the way through the next week with trying to keep those temperatures where they are. Maybe it's a shot at some cooler weather once we get out to about the 13th, coming into parts of the Delta, but it was a very consistent forecast because of the lack of any sort of frontal boundary squeezing down into the south. What about beyond that? 6 to 10 day forecast here, we can see more troughing in the northwest, hence the cooler weather there, and this corridor in through here of above average temperatures showing up in both models. So we continue to see through much of our southern region here, especially the eastern 2/3 of it, temperatures that are very typical for summer. That's what this is really telling me. Same pattern stays established through the 21st of the month as well. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about is the new long-range update. I put some notes over there on the right, and you feel free to pause this video and take a look at it. But my main consensus here is with the MJO going back to phase 1 and 2, that's going to light up the tropics, which means we're going to have a hard time looking at a precipitation map and making sense of it simply because we don't know what the tropics are going to do once we get to the end of this month or the 3rd and 4th weeks of this month. But this pattern you see over here on the right basically is what we saw in the month of July. It's just too warm west. That's the only thing that's wrong with this map at this point. I think much of our southern region sees near average, just slightly above average temperatures as we progress through the end of the month of August. Now, of course, there'll be fronts that sweep through at times, but this is a long-range average, and that seems to be the name of the game as we move forward here. Okay, I really appreciate your attention this week. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll give you some new updates next week, all right? Thank you so much.